Well, hi everyone, and good morning. This is Scott King over at Zimperium, and thank you so much for joining me with app security and risk findings for finance apps in the Asia, Pacific, and Oceania region. And I'm joined with my good friend and colleague, Pat Shui. Pat, how are you this morning?
Hey, good Scott. How are you doing?
Good. I'm really glad that you're joining me to talk about this. Just a little bit about us. I've worked at Zimperium for about 5 years now. I work on some app security business, talk to security leaders and application development leaders about the risks in their mobile apps and then how to defend against fraud. Pat, what about you? What are you doing over there in that part of the world?
Yeah. So I've been working with companies and corporates around protecting their application, mobile devices, right? All the way from Japan down to Australia. It's quite a big coverage, and it's been quite an interesting journey just to see the maturity of application security team, right? Looking at the different changes landscape and how they go about protecting the apps and ultimately the customer data, right, and their business. So yeah, so that's what we do over
Perfect,
here.
perfect. Yeah, well, in a mobile first world, security is paramount. So, what we're going to do is we're going to run through some data about 700 apps that we had actually scanned and looked at the risks and the opportunities for improvement in some of these applications. Over 700 iOS and Android mobile banking and payment applications, cryptocurrencies, things like that. But just at a high level, wanted to walk you through some of these stats before we get into more detail. If you do have questions on anything that we cover this morning, please place your questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom window, and we'll get to those at the end. And then, of course, we're providing the recording and the slides, so you can take a look at the full deck. We're not going to go through all of them this morning, but we will provide some, high-level statistics about, the apps that are sending, you know, PII or personal information over insecure communication channels. We're going to talk a little bit about obfuscation and how many mobile finance apps do not obfuscate the code. We're going to talk about the OWASP mobile top 10 checks in terms of compliance, and then a little bit about the transaction amount, Pat, of a mobile fraudulent transaction is over twice what on a web-based transaction. So really, really interesting. So let's get into it.
Yeah, yeah.
So Pat, interesting. This is data from the RSA quarterly fraud report. Australia has the highest average, fraudulent transaction here at
Yeah.
$364. I found this really interesting. Any insights on maybe why that is?
Yeah, well, I think that's definitely stood out, right? I actually had a more detailed look at the report, right? So actually, the differences between an average, like a genuine transaction, was around 150 dollars, but the fraudulent transaction is actually twice of the actual legitimate transaction, and they're mostly around actually fraudulent credit card transactions. So, I think we know Australia have a high cost of living, but I think it's also a good, profit or ROI for the frosters, right? They're looking
Yeah,
at
interesting.
ways they can
Interesting
gain.
that Australia was the highest average. And
Yeah.
then of all the fraudulent transactions, 3 out of 4, or almost 3 out of 4, 72% are actually via the mobile channel, either an app or a browser. Any idea why that may be, Pat?
Well, so I think with the last 3 months, everybody being locked down, right? I think mobile no doubt has been the main device for us, right? So I'm not too surprised actually, and in fact, on the mobile channel, there's a sort of separation between mobile transaction through an application, right, and through a browser, and we're seeing both, of those increasing, over time, right? So I think it's probably just going to be the norm, right, going forward.
Yeah, I think so. And, since we are locked down and we're, primarily using mobile devices or at least devices at home security landscape is changed quite a bit, and that makes these banking impersonations really, really scary.
Yeah.
Most recently, with the BlackRock malware, that Trojan on Android mimicking all the different the banks looking for credentials and credit card information. Any comments on the BankBot's Trojans, Pat?
Yeah, yeah. So I think this has been an area of interest to many of our people in the region, right? In fact, if you look at the BlackRock malware, it's actually targeting some of the well-known Australian bank and institution across the region. And what's really interesting is actually not new, right? A lot of the behavior and the code base came from, all the way back to 2016, 2014, right? The Cerebus, family. So essentially, these app are actually, I had actually some sample and I was playing with it. It's really interesting how they have, access to getting when you're prompting for credit card information, they can overlay on top. They can read SMS. They can forward SMSs. They can even get notification, from your system, from your application. It also has the ability to hide itself, right? So I think, they're really getting very sophisticated, and they are basically programmed to be monitoring apps. And as soon as the application, is launched, the banking Trojan will then, put a identical user interface on top of the real app, right? So for the user, we wouldn't actually know, right? And I think that the essence is that it's not just banking, because I know we're focusing on banking today, but we are seeing increase of social media app, communication app, even lifestyle, dating application, really taking advantage of this, social distancing, right? So I think that definitely something a lot of people need to really look at ways to protect their application and their customers about.
Yeah, I think the practice of capturing those credentials and credit card data is actually shifting, like you said, by targeting apps that are probably seeing increased traffic. Now that we're all at home,
Yeah.
the media usage has changed, so the criminals know that, right?
Hmm.
And interesting that the average value of a fraudulent mobile payment is twice the other
Yeah.
fraudulent payment that we talked about.
Yeah.
Previously, the Australian number was 364, but if you are successful in creating a fraudulent transaction on mobile, it's twice that, right?
Yeah.
Because maybe again, the cyber criminals are becoming smarter. They're looking at usage and understand the security and fraud systems, and they're sneaking through this way.
Yeah, and I think Scott, just on this, right? If you think about, from compromising application and taking advantage of the digital channel, right? If I was a human, I'm trying to use a credit card, right? Manually perform this transaction. Obviously, it's not as fast, right? But if you do this through the application, hiding underneath the transaction, it's quite easy for these micro transactions to take place, right? So I think not surprised. It's really just a trend that we are seeing now.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, let's move on to some of the data around the obfuscation. So this data is actually from a different report. Most mobile financial apps fall short of security best practices. And if you look across the regions, these are all mobile finance apps. Most of them do not use any obfuscation, Pat. Why would that be? Specifically in the APAC region, only 44% use some level of obfuscation, but
Yeah,
only 9% actually use an actual security product that's not open source.
yeah. So I think as you can see here, right, Scott is quite consistent globally, right? And I think there is this perception that the application once it's created and built, once it's published, it's basically a binary file. There's no yeah. I think that there's no awareness that they need to do something. In fact, if I talk to a lot of the banking customers in the region, right, they are thinking about it now. They are using some of the free, freely available open source tools. But I think that a lot of the idea is that, hey, my banking app or my trade app doesn't actually store data locally, communicating, with my backend. My backend is protected. The user doesn't really have some sensitive information, right? I think that that's the usual feedback that I get. But I think what they not realizing that the app is essentially the window into your backend, right? So if your window is broken or is not protected, then you essentially your house with many window. People are hitting you from left, right, center without any visibility, right? So I think that's probably the common cause. But yeah, I think another point I wanted to point out is that because we as Imperium we analyze a lot of the malware, right, as part of our partnership with Google and working with many customers. In fact, the one interesting analysis we found is that even malware, right? Bad guys creating malware, they are using obfuscation more than the actual legitimate app, right? So that's really staggering. I think the number was like, over 60% of the malware, they're actually obfuscating and hiding that from the security and from the actual, you know, the good behavior, right? So Scott, isn't that interesting?
That is an interesting fact that the bad guys are using more obfuscation. That
Yeah.
is
So I think
that's
we should as a good guy we should promote that and we should use more than the bad guy, right? We can't just let them enjoy. So yeah,
yeah, we can't let them have a free ride, right?
that's right.
And especially we can't make it easy to reverse engineer our apps. So talk to us about a little bit about the some of the
Sure.
successful reverse engineering attempts where large amount of money was actually stolen from the back end, but like
Yeah.
you said, the window was the mobile app. These guys had broken windows.
That's right. That's right. So I think this is a like a I think one of my passionate topic, right? So many times when we talk to the application development teams, right, or even the security team, I think there is this I think gap, right, in terms of visibility. But if you just look at examples in the last 3 months, right, all the governments are rushing out with COVID tracing app, right, Scott? And we did some analysis for some of the app and about 2 months ago, I think the Indian government, for example, they released the app, and you saw every government saying that it's open source. We are not collecting sensitive data. Here is the code, right? And what happens is the attacker take that application, they pull it apart because it's not obfuscated and protected, and they inject the ransomware and then essentially turn on all these other tracking features that the original app didn't have, right? They repackage the application and they put it back to the third-party app store, right? It trick the user through phishing to actually update the original legitimate app, and then enhance and create all these havoc, right? So I think it's important, regardless what you think the application's secure or not, right? There's actually a big brand damage in there, right? And the fact that your application can be pulled apart, repackaged, right? Interrogated, inspected, and get all these things done without even you as a developer have any insight, right? I think that's probably the biggest feedback we're seeing, right? People are having access to your app 24/7, right? They could be hacking it offline or online. If your application don't have the ability to see that, defend yourself, that's actually going to be a big problem going forward, right? So that's really where we're seeing, right? Obfuscation being one example, right? And there's many best practices that I think application development teams should consider, right? So yeah.
Right. I think we should give the anybody packaging an app or anybody reverse engineering any kind of cybercrime, we should really understand that they're being really innovative, especially now as our
Yeah.
habits change and we're looking for more information.
Yeah.
The contact tracing apps, really good example.
Yeah.
Um, but let's get into a little bit about the data that we're going to provide today, Pat.
Hmm.
Just want to explain a little bit about how we provide this data, how we collected this data. We took 234 iOS apps across the region and 515 Android apps, and we put them through our Zscan application reputation service. So this is an actual tool that'll help you understand the risks in an app during build time. So and once you update your app, once you're adding features or fixing bugs in your app, Zscan will help you identify whether or not you're making your app better or worse. So there are security summaries. We focus on the application risks, and then the privacy information. That really focus on the application's access to data and how securely it provides security around those data features Those are device IDs, SMS communications, anything like that. So Pat, let's get into a little bit about what we found.
Mhm. Sure.
So with the OWASP mobile top 10 results, here's just a high-level summary. 9 out of 10 apps fail for insecure data storage. Most of the apps fail for insecure communications. Many of the Android apps fail, here for the code tampering, and almost all apps fail for reverse engineering. I mean, this is
Mm.
really just the inherent nature of software. It's easy to
Yeah.
reverse engineer, so we need to be careful.
Yeah. Yeah. And Scott, maybe just add a little bit here, right? So from our analysis or assessment perspective, using the Zscan platform, right, we're really trying to help development team to uplift their security posture of their app, right, during that cycle. And I think that the biggest thing that we find is that the developers are usually not a security expert, right? And the security team that is doing all these policies and guidelines are not developer, right? So we're really trying to bridge this gap, right? Using this common platform for communication.
Yeah, and then here's just a visual representation. This is a collection of all of the apps and what percentage pass or fail. Green here is passing and red is failing. So you can see there's lots of opportunity for improvement. These are the iOS apps. The next chart, it changes just a little bit for Android, but still, lots of room to grow and improve for data storage and secure communications. And then code tampering and code quality. So a lot of room for improvement. So if you are monitoring the OWASP Mobile Top 10 in your application development process, hopefully you are, and you're keeping up with that and documenting that. So when we collectively look at all these apps, we're plotting them in this distribution model. So some apps have more privacy risk, that's in the lower left-hand corner, and they have more security risks in the lower left-hand corner. So the leaders are in the upper right-hand side, and the laggards, or those that need improvement, are in the lower left. So you can see it's a pretty even distribution. There's not really any clumps other than, kind of around the center. And what happens is we're looking at, critical and dangerous security findings, data leakage findings. And here's just a visual representation of what we're looking at. Username and password exposed in URLs. You can see about 8% of the apps actually provide that type of functionality. Pretty dangerous. And then, vulnerable versions of libraries, over-the-air app installation, which could lead to, to some files being downloaded. But
Yep.
interesting, Pat, we did plot these against other regions. And,
Yep.
we noticed APAC, all of these apps in this sample set, there are some variances in this chart.
Yeah, I think for this one, not so much of a difference, right? Compared regionally, I think the few other ones down the track there will be, but I think it's really interesting, Scott. I think we were talking about this right when we were putting together the report. We kind of thought that the security scoring and all that finding should be consistent, right, for all the apps, but it turns out that it could there's a variation regionally as well.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. What we did, I assumed that it was all going to be the same.
Yeah,
But, when you look at it across, pinpoint location, obviously these are banking apps, so there is use of location. So 60% across all regions pretty much do this. Recording the audio,
that's an
left.
interesting one, right? Like,
Yeah,
why
yeah.
would your banking app want to record audio? Maybe they want to talk to you eventually. Um,
Yeah, or some type of search. I did look inside my mobile banking app that I have on my device. It does not
yeah,
have access to audio
right.
or
Yeah.
calendar, so I
And
did
I think
want
the
to take a
last
look
one
at
was
that.
interesting, right, Scott? The health kit access. So we're seeing, some, digital business model. They're trying to collect, your health data to see how fit you are, right? I've got in fact, a telco in Singapore. They are basically giving away a gigabyte of data every month. but you have to do say 10,000 steps, right? So they're actually using this data to gamify and try to create a bit more user engagement, right? So I think there are business benefit there, but I think at the same time is you as a bank, you need to know what access you're having, and then how you're storing and managing those data.
Yeah, I can definitely see a use for that. Maybe in a health insurance app, if you wanted to lower your premiums, you would have access to health data, see how many steps you take, or see what kind of physical activity. So that would be a good incentive. So the Android distribution looks a little bit different. Again, the scatter plot works the same. Any apps needing improvement are in the lower left. Any of the leading apps are in the upper right. So let's take a look at this, Pat. So this chart doesn't really show us much, but when we look at the comparisons on using WebKits or insecure data storage
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
retrieving mobile apps, there is some variance. Pat, any comments that you have on this chart?
Yeah. So I think, if we're just focusing on the red lines, these are the APAC, right, apps, right? So you can see there are quite, I think, well, the finding skewed towards, API data to be exposed. They are talking about, oh, sorry, the insecure storage, right? We're talking about certificate not being validated. It's actually a common problem, right? Because there's all these communication to the backend server and not, best practices like certificate pinning, and all that is not being implemented by the development team. And I think the other one we see a lot in the region is actually cryptography. How do we go about encrypting communication of the data, right, on the device, and also to the backend system? These are some of the things we resonate quite well with the customers in the region that can be improved on.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. So we did have a comment from a viewer on the audio in a mobile banking app.
Yeah, that was a
So
good one.
someone says that a mobile banking app, if they're using your microphone, you can do some voice authentication with that. So this would be, probably in a know your customer or authentication solution. Maybe
Yeah.
they're looking for a voice recognition pattern. So that's pretty cool.
Mm, yeah, it's a good one. Yeah.
So Pat, here on the critical privacy findings, here I'm trying to get rid of my window here. Um, if we look at the comparisons here on these are, privacy findings in Android, you look at here, um, any comparison that you want to call out here, maybe different
Yeah.
permissions,
Yeah.
credentials. Some of these are actually using the beacons like the contact tracing apps.
That's right. That's right. So I think I was quite surprised the screen capture was actually quite low for APAC. It's funny how EMEA has higher usage, right? Because I would have thought that would be a common thing. But I think one thing maybe just to call out, I think some of these are like more sort of technical in nature that can be fixed and addressed, right, through your coding practices. But we are seeing, the last one about the whole bundle of packing like application packing libraries, right? So we're seeing a lot of these applications are now using the technique to essentially hide, right? Although these are from the public store, right? But we are seeing just even some security applications are implementing protection, right? To try to avoid, make it difficult for the attacker. So I think that's a small percentage of Asia, but only actually happening in Asia. That's the last bullet point.
Yeah,
Lexing, yeah,
yeah. The APAC here jumps out to me, accessing the phone call log. Actually who you call.
yeah.
Um, and so I can't really understand, why such a high usage in APAC, but maybe there's a reason. So maybe someone has a comment on that.
Mm-hmm.
So again, here are some of the dangerous, privacy findings, some of the data, accessing the calendar, things like that. The clipboard,
Yeah.
that's a data leakage opportunity if you don't properly secure that.
Mm-hmm.
Last known location here in the U.S. Location is quickly becoming private data.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to keep that data secure so it doesn't leak out. Especially since we're providing so much data back to these apps, especially with the health kit info, with the clipboard info, any kind of call log info. I mean, these, the mobile devices know more about us than our closest relatives.
Yeah, yeah. And Scott, I think just on this one, I think, often when we talk to, developers, right, they obviously the concern was around the security aspect, right? But I think there's more and more emphasis on the privacy side now, simply because if you look at, any developer, right, they'll use over 30 SDKs in their app, right? A lot of those SDKs are not developed by them, obviously, right? Third party, and some of these privacy or tracking feature are actually implemented in the SDK, and the developer actually was not aware of, right? So once you take that in and you build that into your app, all of a sudden you inherit that capability, right? So it's also important, right, from the independent perspective, looking at things like some of these issues that, so you're aware, right, that your application actually has this capability, should it actually be there, right, in the first place, right? As opposed, it's actually a design or intentional thing.
Yeah,
So that's the
that's a good point. I like that you said you inherit that functionality by using that library or that SDK, which,
mm,
it could be an unintended consequence, and you
that's
really
right.
don't know. And if you don't know you're collecting that data, you definitely don't understand whether or not you're securing it. So I
Yes.
think that would take it back to our best practice recommendations here, Pat. You really
Yeah.
need to be scanning and testing your app continuously. You need to make sure that you understand the attack surface and take actions based on your level of risk.
Yeah, yeah. So I think these three steps are really, the best practices that we, talk to many of the application development and security team. If we go back to to our, where we first started, right? Um, I think it's a process, and people talk about DevSecOps, right? It is really a life cycle. It's never, you cannot really put security at the end, right? When everything's done and say, okay, let's put some instrumentation, and then I just want to draw the similarity here, right? If you look at application and digital transformation, the big thing is about user experience, right, Scott? So people would say, okay, I want to measure response time. I want to measure, what, if application crashes and things like that. So that's common, that's everywhere. But I think the next level that we are, taking the maturity of a lot of the company is that, when you are developing, you are scanning and ensuring, right, the privacy perspective and security perspective of the app cannot be exploited, right? Or it's done in a compliance level, right? And just before you push out the application, remember the COVID example, right? Government app example. You want to make sure you harden your app so that people cannot easily pull that apart, right? Because once they pull that apart, that's where fraud and all these transactions that you're seeing on the RSA report comes in, and that will slow down the reverse engineering, or even making it difficult, right? And then the third approach is really instrumenting your application with the security telemetry, right? So that, hey, your application is launching, and by the way, there's about 5 different malwares and Trojan on the device. Maybe your application need to do something and respond to that, right? Maybe the application is running on the device that's already compromised, right? Because ultimately, you remember, right? The attacker owns the phone that they're using. The attacker have your app. They basically control everything, right? So you also need to have that awareness, right? And the third point is really when someone is poking around, maybe trying to look at the API you're using, interrogating and hooking your application to see all these, sensitive data that's been communicated. You want to know that and have that feedback back to your, security organization, right? So, you know, really the best practices here is about layered approach, just like how you have firewalls and IPS and endpoint security on your perimeters. Your app should really have this layer of security as well, right? So that's,
Yeah,
yeah, in the
the layered approach is important, and even we had a question, Pat, come in from
yeah,
an audience member. Have you found that banks may think that they have so much security that even if someone gets in from a mobile device, their
yeah,
security systems will detect it?
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
maybe.
that's right.
There are instances where there are security systems in place, but the edge cases on mobile are very valid because these are
Mm,
running on third-party devices that you don't own or control. You don't understand the health of that device unless you're measuring it. And if you allow,
yeah,
your app and your APIs and communications to run in an unhealthy environment, you're putting yourself at risk. And
yeah.
are you actually measuring that risk, and can you do anything about it?
Mm. So I think just on that question, I think it brings up a good point, right? So you have your security protection on your server side, right? And I think we have a great example, Scott, right? A couple of years back, there was a UK bank that was compromised, right? And that for that particular example is that the attacker was able to interrogate and hook the application on the device that they control, right? And they were able to inject transactions through the application to the backend server, right? So now, if you think about the backend server, I'm seeing the transaction coming in as a normal. It's actually coming from a mobile device, a legitimate app, right? So the security system, is actually not able to differentiate if it's a fraudulent transaction versus a bad transaction, right? Or someone trying to attack, right? So what in that particular scenario, many of the, I guess, more forward-looking banks are really looking at, okay, so when the transaction comes in, let's attach context around that transaction, right? Is the device, is the transaction originating from a device that's compromised, that has maybe Trojan and malware, right? That has, maybe a network has been compromised and man-in-the-middle attack has been detected, right? So if you can attach transaction to the context of the security of the app, right, where it's originating from, then you're enriching your ability to defend and fight against fraud, right? So I think that's probably the insight, because if you don't have those contexts, then they're just another transaction, right? How are you going to go about to analyze millions of transactions a day, whether they're good or bad, right?
Yeah, and I think, to really understand the threat models and maybe which ones you may be more susceptible to, would be a good opportunity to learn how to recover. And so, I'll leave it open here for other questions about the data in the report, or if you have any questions at all about mobile banking applications, please contact us if you'd like a risk assessment similar to the ones that we performed with these 700 apps. If you'd like us to talk with you about your app and maybe some of the risks involved in how you are developing your application, or for good or bad, just to make sure that you're covered. And then if you'd like to take a look at some of the mobile threat data that actually comes in through mobile banking applications and third-party apps, what that may look like for your security organization, please, you can email Pat or I, or go to our website and fill out the contact us form, and we'll get to you as soon as possible. But Pat, I'll just want to say thank you very much for taking your time and talking with me this morning, and thank everyone for joining. And just really appreciate the time you invested in learning about Zimperium and what we're doing for mobile applications. Pat, do you
Sure.
have any closing comments?
No, I think, yeah, I think it was just good to share. Obviously, we only can touch a little bit of the topics and findings, and I think ultimately, right, if you look at the digital transformation journey, I can see a lot of attendees today. They are probably building application, they're helping customer building applications, right? They're maybe from the security perspective trying to understand what capabilities out there. I think I just wanted to sort of just let everybody know, right? Security is a sort of never-ending story, right? Just because you think you've got it all sorted out, new attack comes in, right? So I think my experience is that let's just make sure the development team can focus on features and functions, and help the business move the needle, right? Let the experts like us to help you uplift your security thing. So because you developer only have limited time, right? So the more time they can spend on building features and less time worry about security by embedding these capability, it will be really, I think, a new way of looking at how to protect yourself, right? Not about building stuff yourself.
Perfect, perfect. Well, thanks so much, Pat, and thank you to our audience, and have a great rest of your day.
Sure. Thank you, everyone.